Hello, this is Scott Moore at the Baden-Powell Service Association, and today I'm going to be talking about splicing rope. To start off, a couple of basics when it comes to splicing, some things that are going to be kind of consistent regardless of the type of splice you work on. When you're dealing with rope, to start off you're going to want to unwind the rope, and then when you're actually working on the splice you're also going to want to temporarily unwind part of it. To do that, all you simply do is rotate, hold on to both ends of the rope, or two different ends of a section of rope, and just rotate it the opposite way that the spirals go. And you'll see it will quickly separate into its individual strands. This rope is actually made of 2 red threads and 1 white thread. I have another rope I'm going to use, which is made of 2 blue threads and a single white thread. If I rotate this back in the direction of the grain, it will become rope once again. When working on a splice, what you actually want to do, or what you're attempting to do, is to connect either 2 pieces of rope together. You're trying to make a loop in a rope, so you're connecting it back to itself, or you might be trying to work the end of a rope so that it no longer frays. So a back splice is one where you actually work the frayed ends of the rope back into the body of the rope. So this would be an alternative to whipping to repair a rope and to keep it from fraying any further. When you want to start working on any splice, actually, your end of your rope is going to be separated into your individual threads. It's a good idea to tie a little bit of string around a point in the rope where you want the frays or the separated windings to stop. So I don't want them to go past this point, so I tied a little knot on there with a little piece of green thread. You'll see that on several of the splices I make, and that's just to prevent it from coming apart any further at that point. So to make a back splice, what we're essentially going to do is take these 3 threads, and they're going to be woven back into the body of the rope, so that where I've marked it with that little green thread, that's going to be right near the end of our newly spliced rope. That is a back splice, because you're wrapping the rope back against itself. There's also something called an eye splice. An eye splice, instead of winding these strands back into the rope itself, you actually wind them further down into the rope. And when you do that, you end up with an eye. So you have an eye built into the rope that you can use to wrap around something or attach to a pillar or a post or a spar or whatever. And really the difference there between the back splice and the eye splice is where you start winding back in. If you start right at the top, you're going to have a back splice and you're just going to finish the end of the rope to prevent it from fraying. If you start winding it in further down the rope, you're going to end up with an eye splice, and you're going to have this loop built right into the rope that you can use to attach to things. So to start off, we're going to talk about the back splice. With the back splice, I'm going to unwind a section of my rope. I already put my thread on there to stop it from unwinding any further. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to tie a crown knot into the tip of our splice. So I don't know how well you can see that. I have 3 threads coming off the end. I have 2 red threads to the lower right and lower left, and I have my white thread on top. What you want to do for a crown knot is you want to make a loop with each section, and each section is essentially going to loop around the thread that is next clockwise. So, and it's hard for me to do it facing you, so I'm going to do it facing me and then hopefully show you what it looks like. And get it to stay. It's probably going to be hard to see, but if you can follow any thread, actually it's probably easiest to follow the white thread on this one. It actually wraps around the winding that's next clockwise in order, and each one of them does. When you pull all 3 threads, they start closing in on that knot in the middle. And sometimes this is one where sometimes it's easier to do it with 2 hands and your teeth, but you may have to work the knot down so it's even, and it finishes pretty tight. So there, actually that came out pretty good. So there's a crown knot in the end of my splice. Whoop. And once you've got that crown knot, and that's pulled right down to my green thread, what you want to do, and this is true for the next step, is essentially true for all splices. What you want to do is you take your windings and you want to weave them back into your rope, and the way you do that is the working thread, you always go over and then under. So I'm going to grab one thread here, and it's this red thread happens to be right next to another red thread. So what I do is I go over the red and I want to go under this white thread. So what I will do is I will unwind my rope a little bit by twisting it. This will go over the red and under the white, and I will pull it through, and then I'll allow the rope to twist back into shape. So when I do, you can see that that one thread, that one red thread, is now weaving itself back down, and I'll do the same thing again. I'll go over the next red thread and under the next thread. So this is going to end up, your individual threads are going to end up spiraling through the rope in the exact opposite kind of direction of curvature of your original rope threads. Now while you're doing this, because you're untwisting the rope and twisting the rope back and forth several times, it's going to start to unwind a little bit on you. What you can do is just twist the rope by holding both ends and turning it, and that will make it a little bit tighter. And then you can see, whoops, you can see how that one thread is woven down. So what you want to do is you want to continue that for each of your 3 threads until they're woven completely back along the length of the rope. And once you do that, you'll have your green thread that you used as your marking point. That will be right near the end. So to shorten time, what I did is I did another splice at the other end of the rope. You can see my little green thread up here, right by the crown knot. And down here, you can see the ends of the individual strands hanging out. What you can do is either tuck those in if the rope will stay, if it'll stay nice and tight. This actually happens to be an artificial fiber, so this is like a nylon rope or a plastic rope, so it's a little slippery. The easiest thing to do here is snip the ends down so they don't stick out from beyond the end of the rope. You'll also notice that when you do a back splice, the back splice becomes a thicker diameter than the rest of the rope, just because you have double the number of twists in there. You can twist the rope and squeeze it and work it a little bit to try and flatten it. On really thick ropes, what they recommend is when you go so far back, you start cutting the diameter of the individual threads, cut those down by half after so many twists back in. But you want to work back as many twists as you can along the end, and then with the crown knot in the end and with the rest of the rope woven down on there, that will stay pretty sturdy. So you've got the end of the rope protected from fraying then. That was a back splice. I talked a little bit about the eye splice there as well. Another type of splice is the short splice, and the short splice is for actually connecting together 2 ropes. So I have here a red rope and a green rope, red rope and a blue rope. The blue rope is 2 blue threads and a white thread, And the red rope is 2 red threads and a white thread. And a short splice, putting these together, is really kind of an alternative to a square knot or a reef knot if you're using 2 ropes of the same diameter, or a sheet bend if you have ropes of slightly different diameter. Though this, for splicing, you really want to have 2 similar ropes. So splicing is really an alternative to the reef knot or the square knot for joining 2 ropes. So again, I put my little strings around both edges of the rope as far down as I want them to separate, and then I can twist these ropes apart into the individual threads. And I'll do the same with the red rope. And then what you want to do, once you have your 2 sets, oops, let me bring those back a little bit so you can see them. Once you have your 2 sets of 3 threads or 3 windings from each rope, you want to overlay these just like this, as close together as you possibly can. So now on the side of the red rope, I have 2 free blue threads and a free white thread, and on the side of the blue rope I have 2 red threads and a white thread from the other rope. And then in this case you don't use a crown knot, you actually just start taking the individual threads and weaving them back in. So I would take my red rope, I could untwist it a little bit so I get some spacing there to put a thread back in, and let's say push these closer. So just like we did before with the other splices, you're going to unwind the rope on this side, and I'm going to take a thread. In this case I'll take a white thread. Actually, let's take a blue thread just to be different. And I'm going to take my blue thread over my closest strand, which happens to be red, and I'm going to stick it underneath the white thread. So I go over the red and under the white. So that is how I'm going to start off. That is how I'm going to start off my short splice for connecting these 2 ropes. And then what I would do is just follow that blue strand around, weaving it back through the rope by opening up the rope a little bit so I can see the individual strands. I go over a thread, under the next thread, over the next thread, under the next thread. And I'm going to do that essentially 6 times. 1 for each of the 3 strands along here, and then 1 for each of the 3 strands along here. The toughest part is to get it really tight in the middle, where the 2 sets of strands finally come together to their own individual ropes. Again, to save time, I already wove 1 into the other end of this, and you'll notice the same thing that I mentioned before. When you weave it in, the diameter of your rope does increase because you essentially have twice the number of strands in a certain area. So my splice ends here between my fingers on the rope, and I don't even know if you can see, can't even see where the ends of the thread were. I may have actually cut them off in here. The green threads, my placeholders, I may have actually cut those off when I was done, I don't remember. But it's, you can see it actually has some strength to it once you do a splice. So again, this is 2 separate ropes, managed to splice them together and they hold. Again, you will get the little ends of the rope or the ends of the individual windings sticking out at the very end. If it's a thicker diameter thread rope, sometimes you can just hide them back in there and tuck them in. If it's something like this where it's slippery because it's plastic and it's a thinner thread, you might just want to cut them off so they're as flush as possible to your splice and to your rope. So that is the back splice and the short splice, and some general guidelines for splices in general.